I'm Simi Sara. All right, we're getting reaction to the fiscal platform the NDP released yesterday because this time around in this election, there are four political parties that people are interested in. BC Conservatives, the NDP, we have the BC Liberals, and of course we have the Green Party. That's why we have Jane Sterk, leader of the Green Party, with us now. Hi, thanks for being here.
Hi, Simi. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, it seems to me that people are very interested these days in the details, right? They kind of want to get down to the nitty-gritty on this. So let's talk about that. What does the Green Party say about that NDP fiscal platform released yesterday?
Well, the thing that strikes me about and that strikes us about the fiscal plan is that they're using an old-school approach to budgeting, and kind of a very political approach. Our plan is better than your plan. And we think that budgets need to happen with people, and particularly with people in the legislature. So these should be a result of conversations, not an imposition of a particular belief that people have, and not something that is really just an election platform or an election ploy that says, oh, vote for us because we're going to do things better. And what we see in this budget, which is typical of, I think, all of this kind of thinking, is that we're going to have a few cuts, we're going to raise taxes, and with the savings or the increase in revenue that we get from that, we're going to implement new programs without any evidence that the existing programs aren't working. So we think it's a real old-style approach to budgeting.
What is the new style approach then? What do you do?
Well, you go out and you reach out to the community. We need to have a broadly based conversation in British Columbia about the kinds of things that we think the government should be supporting and how we should support them. And then we need to look at the overall fiscal reality of British Columbia and say, okay, how are we going to do that? How are we going to address the priorities that people in British Columbia have?
Right, but let's use some common sense on this here. If you do that and you go out to the public to say, what do you want? People who say what they want are only going to do it in their own self-interest. You're never going to get somebody to really come out and talk about the hard, tough choices that have to be made.
Oh, I don't agree with you.
Aren't you elected, though, to make those tough choices?
I think that what we've had is a series of governments that believe that they're going to make the choices on behalf of the people of British Columbia, and we have evidence after evidence that the people of British Columbia are saying, we don't like what you're doing. And I don't think people function in their own self-interest. I think that there are processes that you can use that get input from people that so that they can understand the economic realities, and that they select the priorities out of that. It's a more complex process, but it's one that I think in the end will have governments actually doing what the people of British Columbia want.
Did you support the tax increases that were mentioned yesterday?
Well, for things that we care about, like the carbon tax, they're just tinkering with the carbon tax, and we think it requires some pretty fundamental reform. And there is no sense of what is the goal of the tinkering that they're doing. There doesn't seem to be any intention for what that carbon tax should achieve. The other thing that we're very concerned about is the corporate capital tax on credit unions, because that tax is going to essentially tax member deposits as part of that, which means that our credit unions will become more expensive. They won't be serving they won't be able to serve their members as effectively as they're doing now because their costs will go up. And so some of these ways that they're going about approaching the revenue, we don't think are prudent. The other thing is that there's nothing in their plan that says what their opinion is on the existing revenue projections of the BC Liberal government. So we haven't really seen whether or not they're projecting revenues at the same level, for instance, from the gas industry. And so there's a lot of incompleteness in this plan.
You mentioned the carbon tax there, and you said you believe in fundamental reform. What kind of reform? What would that look like?
Well, we think that the carbon tax needs to be broadly based, so eliminating the loopholes that are currently in it. They've addressed just one aspect of the oil and gas loopholes, which are the emissions, but they haven't talked about the logic of exempting cement and aluminum industries from the carbon tax. And they're not increasing the carbon tax. And a carbon tax is only effective if it gets to a certain level where you have a level playing field for things like clean energy, the renewable energy sector. And so we need to approach the carbon tax differently than they're approaching it and than the BC Liberals are.
Would you look at that as a greater revenue generator?
Well, a carbon tax is best if it's offset against income or investment or payroll, if it's a revenue neutral tax. We think that there's an argument to be made to with the emissions with the rate of the carbon tax going up, to apply the increase in revenue to things like deep retrofits of homes and buildings, so that then people can benefit from the carbon tax, or into transit, so then people have more choices about their ability to move around without a single occupancy vehicle. So for a defined period of time, we think that there's an argument to be made. But ultimately, a carbon tax works best if you get the tax in one form and you give it back to the people in another form that gives them more choices. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can do it as a tax and dividend, or you could do it as a tax and offset it against income tax.
Are there tax increases that you would support to generate more revenue?
You know, what we think we need to do is get in there and look at how government is spending our money. We think that there are things like subsidies to the oil and gas industry that need to be eliminated, and that's a pool of money. We also think that there's some efficiencies to be found in government. So rather than going on maintaining this kind of thinking about budgets that somehow we have to do tax and cuts, the Green Party wants to go in and actually look at the books, analyze the books, look at the Auditor General's reports on the actual fiscal situation in our Crown corporations and the government itself. And then when we've had that broadly based conversation with British Columbians about what's important and how we should be spending our money, then we look at, is there a need for new taxes? But that's a much further down the road in terms of the conversation.
So when you first heard about the NDP fiscal plan yesterday, what was your first reaction?
My sense is that they're just tinkering with the Liberal plan. It's really based in Band-Aids, in short-term thinking, not in long-term thinking, and that it really is an election budget. It's trying to contrast themselves to a certain extent with the BC Liberals, so that people think there's only two choices about how we might approach the fiscal planning for British Columbia.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Simi.
That is Jane Sterk, leader of the BC Green Party, with her party's reaction to the NDP's fiscal plan.